Edmund Burke's famous dictum, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing," finds one of its greatest illustrations in Tolkien's Legendarium. The last alliance of elves and men was not simply a military coalition at the end of the Second Age. It was the very embodiment of the principle that when the virtuous unite, tyranny can be defeated. The war against Sauron was the defining conflict of the age, and it was won only because those who loved order, law, and tradition were willing to sacrifice everything rather than sit idle while darkness spread. The alliance was conservative unity in action, people with profound differences laying aside quarrels to preserve freedom. It is a lesson that rings as true in our world as in Tolkien's. To appreciate the last alliance, one must first understand the threat. Sauron had risen again in Mordor, building his dark tower, forging armies of orcs and trolls, and extending his tyranny over the free peoples. He had corrupted the Númenóreans who followed him into darkness, creating the Nazgûl, and had begun to extend his rule into surrounding lands. By the end of the Second Age, his dominion threatened all of Middle-earth. If left unchecked, his power would have consumed even the havens of the elves. Burke's warning is apt. Had the good stood aside, Sauron would have triumphed without challenge. Burke, writing in the 18th century, was warning against the temptation of indifference, of those who claimed to love liberty but failed to act when liberty was endangered. In Middle-earth, the choice was clear. Either the free peoples resisted or they perished. The last alliance was Burke's principle, given flesh. The alliance was the opposite of apathy. Elendil, the High King of the Dúnedain, and Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor, chose unity. They gathered the strength of Númenórean exiles and the might of the elven kingdoms. Together, they formed an army of men and elves, reinforced by dwarves from Khazad-dûm and other free folk, determined to confront Sauron at the height of his power. It was a conservative stand against tyranny, rooted in the defense of tradition, kinship, and the created order. The march of the alliance was long and arduous. From Lindon in the west, and from Arnor and Gondor, from Lothlorien and Rivendell, the armies gathered. The chronicles tell us of the great host that marched to Mordor, elves in gleaming mail, men bearing the banners of Númenor renewed, dwarves with their axes, and countless soldiers of lesser kingdoms. They met Sauron's hosts on the plain of Dagorlad before the very gates of Mordor. The battle that followed was one of the greatest of all ages. Dagorlad, the battle plain, was a crucible. Here Burke's principle was tested in blood. The good did not stand idle. They marched into the very maw of evil. Sauron's armies poured forth. Orcs beyond counting. Trolls armed with crude but devastating weapons. Beasts of war bred in the pits of Mordor. The alliance met them with shield and spear. Gil-galad's elves fought with unmatched precision, their ranks holding firm against the endless tide. Elendil's men pressed forward with discipline, their Númenórean heritage giving them strength even in exile. The clash was terrible. Thousands fell. But the alliance held, and slowly they gained ground. By the end of the battle, Sauron's field armies were broken, and the path to Mordor lay open. The victory at Dagorlad was not just military, it was moral. It proved that when conservatives unite, when those who defend order and tradition put aside their differences, they can withstand even overwhelming odds. Had Gil-galad and Elendil refused to join forces, had they chosen to remain aloof, Sauron's hordes would have swept all before them. Instead, they remembered that liberty was at stake, and they acted. This is Burke's teaching, that liberty cannot be preserved by words alone. It must be preserved by action, even costly action. The siege of Barad-dûr followed. For 7 long years, the alliance encircled Sauron's fortress. It was a war of endurance, testing the resolve of both sides. Supplies ran thin, winters were harsh, and the cost in lives was immense. Yet the alliance remained steadfast. They understood, as Burke did, that the price of inaction was far higher. Better to bleed and suffer now than to hand Middle-earth over to tyranny. Their unity endured, and at last Sauron himself was forced to come forth. The cost was immense. Gil-galad fell in single combat with Sauron, his body consumed in flame. Elendil fell beside him, bearing his sword, Narsil, which broke beneath him but would one day be reforged as Anduril. Yet their sacrifice was not in vain. Isildur, Elendil's son, cut the ring from Sauron's hand, and the Dark Lord was overthrown. Though not destroyed utterly, his dominion was broken, and Middle-earth was preserved for the coming age. The last alliance showed that when conservatives unite, when the guardians of tradition and liberty join forces, they can repel even the greatest darkness. Burke's lesson is seen again in what followed. The alliance did not end all evil, Sauron endured in spirit, and Isildur's refusal to destroy the ring planted seeds for the Third Age. But for a time, freedom was preserved. Gondor became a bulwark against Mordor, and Arnor guarded the north. It was proof that unity brings stability, while division invites decline. When Gondor and Arnor later fractured, their strength waned, and evil crept back into the world. The last alliance was a high point because it was a moment when all good men did something together. The lesson for conservatives is clear. Evil flourishes when virtue is idle. But when tradition is defended, when alliances are forged across differences, when courage is shown, tyranny can be broken. The last alliance succeeded because good men did not remain passive. They fought, they bled, and they sacrificed, proving Burke's dictum in legend. It is a lesson that remains urgent today. If you enjoyed this episode of Middle-earth Uncharted, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more adventures ahead. The road goes ever on and on.